Arguably an artist we could do a 20-part series with because she is a successful singer-songwriter, producer, author. The list goes on and on. She's had multiple number ones. She has reissued one of the best albums of our generation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jewel.
Yeah.
Hi, guys. Nice to see you. Really nice to see everybody. I've known you all for a long time. We're all still here.
Yeah, Leslie, you did good. Good job.
Jewel, it is unbelievable, though, because when we were, Barnes and Cubby and I were talking about where do we even begin, because you've accomplished and conquered many things in your career.
It's fun. You know, I've always really enjoyed being the dark horse, and I seemed to put myself in that position over and over because I would switch genres, I would switch formats, and it was like starting over. You know, as you guys know in radio, our familiarity scores, if people don't know how songs test, but, you know, they kind of test through, you know, they'd call people's houses and go, touch tones. You remember that? And it'd be like, does this song sound familiar to you? On a scale of 1 to 5, how passionate are you about this artist? I mean, that's how songs were tested. And I don't know how much has changed, but I never struck high on the familiarity scores because Hands didn't sound like Cool Save Your Soul and et cetera, throughout my whole career. So I was always committed to starting from scratch every single record.
You said it's fun. Here's a weird question. Is fame fun? I know the art of making, you know, your art, which can be writing or music or whatever, but is the fame part fun?
I think, you know, kids have it backwards. They want to be famous, and so they learn to be musicians or influencers or whatever. But that's really backwards. To me, fame is the price you pay to do what you love. I don't particularly find it fun. Not that I would ever sit here and say I'm ungrateful for it.
Oh, yeah. And I'm not saying that at all. I mean, just
it's not the fun part of the job.
Right.
You know, at all. It's the price you pay. And you're lucky to get there for sure.
Does 25 years, it's been 25 years since your first album. Does it seem like 25 years ago or does it seem like last week?
You know, it seems like 5 minutes underwater. No, I'm kidding. In some ways, it feels like 5 minutes. In other ways, it feels like 50 years, 50 lifetimes. You know, I think about that 18-year-old kid. You know, I was living in a car because I wouldn't have sex with a boss. I was terrified. When that boss wouldn't give me my paycheck, you know, I remember I was just destitute. My mom and I were going to get kicked out of where we were living because I couldn't pay rent. And she ended up going back to Alaska, and I was like, I'm going to turn this around. And I don't know why. I was just very stubborn, like, I'm going to get another job. I'm going to get out of this car. And it was just a really hard cycle. I was having panic attacks. I started developing agoraphobia, which is a fear of leaving your home, which when you don't have a home is really hard. And I remember getting a gig as like a last resort, like maybe I can make money this way because I was sick so often. I had bad kidneys. I couldn't hold down a job because I was taking too many sick days and kept getting fired. And it was just this really vicious cycle. And I grew up singing with my dad in bars. You know, you did 5-hour sets for a couple $100. And I was like, I could do that. But I didn't know any cover songs. And so I started writing a ton to try and get 5 hours worth of material because I thought that's what you should do. I didn't know people did 1.5-hour gigs, you know, when it was your own music. And it just, my life turned around. It was like the most transformative time, but it wasn't to get discovered. It wasn't to get a record deal. It was just me saying, I'm either going to die at this moment in my life or I'm going to figure out how to be happy and how to get my head right. And writing was my way of processing it. And holy shit, it turned into a career. And it's a crazy thing to look back on, you know, my mental state and where I was when that first record was made.
Just imagine if you were doing that now, if you were living in your car, like if you were living in a Tesla, that would be just fantastic. Like versus 25 years ago. I mean, because you have TV now in the car, you have, I mean, people
it's a little different.
They live in.
Yeah, what kind of car was it? What kind of car was it, Jewel?
You know, a friend had given me a really crappy little Datsun 510 hatchback.
Ooh, those are thin seats.
I had to leave my key in it because the starter was so busted. So I always lay a towel over my steering wheel because that's not a sign that something's wrong with your ignition and your starter. Your key's probably there. It ended up getting stolen, and that's how I ended up on the street for a while until I could save up for another car.
Tell us about making that first record, because you really did it your way, and the decisions you made, honestly, for someone so young, working with Neil Young and making that record. Can you walk us through that? It had to be a little overwhelming.
Getting discovered was a trip. Again, my goal was just like I probably needed $1,200, $2,000 to get a down payment for first and last month's rent on an apartment. It was a trip. San Diego was a big scene at the time. There were a lot of signings coming out of there, and I couldn't get a gig because every venue considered themselves a place to get signed for artists. And so you actually had to pay them a couple $100 because they considered themselves a venue for you to get signed. And I couldn't afford, I didn't want that. I couldn't afford a couple $100. I needed somebody to pay me to sing. And so I found this coffee shop that was kind of going out of business. And I just was like, I have no following, but if you will just keep your doors open for 2 months, could we try and do this together? And would you let me keep all the door money? If I bring people in, I want the door money, and you can keep the coffee and food money. And we shook on it. And I just set about like handing out flyers to surfers and, anybody that would walk by. And my first show had 2 people. And I did a 5-hour show of the most emotionally like gut-wrenching songs that were 8 minutes long for 5 hours. And these 2 surfers sat there the entire time, and we all were crying. Like it was a trip. But the next Thursday they brought some friends, and the next Thursday they brought some friends, and it built up. And then after maybe 9 months, it was like standing room only, and people were standing in the rain outside watching me sing through the windows. I mean, it was just so touching, again, because where I was coming from emotionally was just scared, lonely. I moved out at 15. I'd been hustling since I was 15. I always tried to stick up for myself and not be leveraged. And that's a scary thing to do because you don't know how it's going to work out. And there I was singing songs that I wrote that were honest and people cared. Again, getting signed was not in my framework. But that group of people became like a family. Like I get chills talking about it. Like they brought me food to eat, and they were just incredible. It was like being validated for who you authentically were when you spent most of your life hiding it. And so when labels came, it was a trip, and I almost didn't sign, which sounds really weird for a homeless kid, but I had just started figuring out the fundamentals of being happy, which was figuring out how to be authentic. And I didn't think the music business was really conducive to that. And you take somebody with my emotional background, and God forbid I become famous. That's every TV movie you've ever seen about every musician. Yeah. It's like the worst stereotypes. And I wanted to avoid it. And so I almost didn't sign a record deal, as weird as it sounds. But I ended up going on the beach in La Jolla and like having a huge heart-to-heart with myself. And I made myself 2 promises. Number one, that I would always make sure that my number one job that I had to take seriously and create a business plan for was how to be a happy person. Like number 2 would be how to be a musician. And then I made myself the promise that I'd always choose music over fame. And so those became my 2 guiding principles, and it affected the bidding war. I ended up being in a bidding war. Every label suddenly wanted me, and I was offered $1 million to sign a record deal as a homeless kid. $1 million.
Well, who was helping you? Did you have a manager, or were you doing all the negotiations, or was it all you?
Yeah, I didn't have a manager at the time, but I read a book called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business. I think it was Kassenheim, maybe.
And it worked.
A lot of people have read that book, yes.
Yeah, I read about mechanicals and royalties and back ends, and I basically realized, quickly that the money isn't a gift, it's a loan. And it's against recoupment. For me to sell enough records to recoup $1 million, that was going to be hard. I'm a folk singer at the height of grunge. And I mean, granted, there was a bidding war over me, but that doesn't mean jack. That does not mean it's going to translate into record sales just because a bunch of record execs got in an ego fight and wanted to beat each other to sign me. It wasn't about me. I didn't take it personal. So I turned down the $1 million, and I took one of the biggest back ends anybody had ever received that would escalate as long as I kept achieving benchmarks. And by this time, I did have a lawyer who's still my lawyer. And just told everybody, like, I'm a singer-songwriter at the height of grunge. I need people committed to me for the long haul because this isn't probably going to be pretty. This is going to be a grind. And I wanted a career like John Prine. That was my goal. I wasn't trying to be famous. I was trying to be a songwriter. And was given access to every amazing producer, but they all wanted to shorten my songs and shape them. And I didn't have a 3-minute song. The shortest song I had was probably 4.5 minutes. The rest were 6, 7, and 8 minutes. And so when I looked at that Neil Young record, it was, obviously a singer-songwriter I admired. I saw Ben Keith's name on there, and I was like, he seems to just let you be who you are and not change you. And I didn't want to change. I wanted to be honest. I wasn't that good. I wasn't that good of a guitar player. I had a ton of heart and a ton of emotion, and that's pretty much what I had. And I wanted to showcase that, not let somebody else's production make me sound more, experienced than I was. And so that's how we started out on that record.
But authenticity, what you said moments ago, is what usually pushes through in the end, especially like you said, at the height of grunge. I mean, they were spending Pearl Jam money to sign you,
Yeah.
all those bands were just ridiculous because we were in the height of it at the same time also. But then there was this change and we started playing you. We started playing Sarah McLachlan. We started playing Lisa Loeb. Like there was this era where that stuff was all pushing to the top. And the Neil Young thing is fascinating, and people who don't have access to brilliance like that in music, it inspired a question for me to ask all of you. If you could meet, who have you not met that if you could meet anyone, like all your life you've had fame, fortune, access, but you've not met this person, who would it be?
That's a great question.
Who could you
Dead or alive? Is it dead or alive?
Start with Jewel. No, alive.
Yeah, I would love to
alive.
hear
Oh, they have
what
to be
Jewel
alive.
has to say.
Yeah.
No, I was ready to hear your guys' answers so I could draft off of them.
Okay, Cubby, go ahead. Who would it be?
Well, mine's dead. I mean, Elvis Presley. I would have loved to have
Yeah, of course.
meet
Who
Elvis
wouldn't?
Presley. But I'm trying to think. I mean, Bono, maybe? I mean, I'm a big U2 fan. Never met Bono.
I would
Leslie?
say, I was able to briefly meet Paul McCartney, but I would love to have met John Lennon.
Wow.
Yeah, it's hard with living. Not that there's not great people living, but
Right, right.
You know mine. Mine's
how about you,
easy.
Barnes?
Reese Witherspoon.
really?
I keep it hard. Yeah, I can't.
Oh, I was sticking with music, though. But yeah.
Oh, no, I
okay.
was saying just anyone in the entertainment business that, I mean, we've all been in different ways, had a lot of access, and we've interviewed hundreds of people, never Reese Witherspoon. For some reason, I'm fascinated by that, but we can't make it happen. So it's like,
And by the way, does Jewel know what your top 5 is? You always say Jewel is always one of my top 5ers. Does
yeah.
Jewel know what a top,
Jewel needs
what a
to
top
know about
fiver
that.
is?
well, no, I mean, I used to say it on the air. I mean, Jewel probably walked out of the studio and I was like, okay, top 5. I mean, you still look like you're 20, which is unbelievable.
Because that's the kind of girl, and Jewel is the kind of girl you would have dated. Like she fits your
Oh, yeah.
quality of
I married a
of
Jewel.
woman. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
But
gotcha.
who would yours be, Jewel? Like who would be the person if you could meet him? Like, because you've probably met almost 98% of them just by the way of where you are.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there no one that stands out that you're like, I'd like to meet that person?
I was really lucky, when my record was a failure for the first year and the label wanted to move off of the record, it hadn't done anything. And then Dylan took me out on the road and, his manager was like, you won't meet him. You won't talk to him. He won't watch your shows. I was like, I get it. And after about 4 nights, his manager was like, you wouldn't believe it, but he wants to meet you. He's been checking your shows out. So I go down there. I'm struggling, It's a good thing I didn't take the money because the record sold 2,000 copies in 12 months. It was brutal. And he liked my lyrics. He would go over my lyrics with me. He's like, what made you write this? Is that like a Merle Haggard reference? Which it was. And Whole Save Your Soul is like so-called Social Security. You guys know that Merle Haggard line. There's a line like that in Whole Save Your Soul, which was I loved Merle. I listened to Merle a ton growing up. And he caught that reference. He's the only one in history that's actually caught that reference. But having him like my music was like, man, if nobody else likes me, who cares? Like Bob Dylan believes in me. And he was like, you just keep going and you keep playing solo acoustic. And then I got to sing with him. Like he actually like called me out on stage and I went to the backup singer's mic to sing and he called me to his mic and I'm sharing a mic like this close with Bob Dylan. And I'm like, don't pass out. Just don't pass out. Just don't pass out. My whole goal was don't pass out. I don't think I sang very good, but I didn't pass out. So that's really good. But other influences, Ella Fitzgerald taught me how to sing, not just her records. I didn't get to meet her. And Sarah Vaughan, like her breath control. I've never heard anybody with Sarah Vaughan's breath control and her tone. So I think those two would be who I'd love to be able to time travel and meet.
That's a really incredible Bob Dylan story, by the way, and it says a lot about your songwriting. And you talked a little bit about some advice or a little exchange you had with Neil Young at Madison Square Garden. Can you share that story? Because here you were opening up for Neil Young, and you're like solo acoustic. I am sure that had to be a little bit of a freak out at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, so after Dylan took me on the tour, I was like invigorated, and I kept working the first record, again to no avail. And so I finally decided to kind of give up. Well, not kind of. Like, I went back in the studio and I started making a record in Bearsville. And then Neil Young asked me to tour with him. So I paused the record, came out on tour with him, and he was with Crazy Horse, you know, one of the most famous rock bands ever, walls of Marshall amps. And we're doing our gig. And he was also, again, just this real mentor. I was like, you know, Neil, I haven't gotten on radio. Like, it isn't working. And he's like, F radio, F the press, F everything. You're a singer-songwriter. You're not a pop star. Like, it's a different gig to be a singer-songwriter. And you have to commit to this lifestyle because you may never get it. And it's like, you can't worry about that. You can't try and make other people happy. You have to do what you think is right. And Neil and Bob both really drilled that in my head, that taking on that mantle as singer-songwriters, it's just a different commitment. It's just a different way, and you just might have to suck it up your whole life. And when I was doing Madison Square Garden, I must have looked green. I was very nervous. And he looked at, we ran across each other in the green room. He's like, what's the matter? You look nervous. You know, he's an intimidating guy. He's kind of grumpy and shaky. And I was like, I was kind of uncharacteristically, like, I was like, yeah, I am nervous. He goes, why are you so nervous? And I was like, because you're Neil Young with Crazy Horse, and I'm solo acoustic at Madison Square Garden, and they're going to kill me. Like, I was so, like, I was, like, visibly, like, holy shit. And he got his finger in my face, and he goes, this is just another hash house on the road to success. You get out there and you show them no respect. And I was like, sir, yes, sir.
What year was this?
I don't know. It's funny. I get chill bumps talking about it. I don't really know. Yeah, I have no idea.
97?
No,
only
this
because
is
I remember.
before I broke.
Before? Oh,
Yeah.
before.
Well, I remember.
Yeah.
When I was working at Z100, Jewel, we had a jingle ball, and we called it "Girls Rule the Yule" because your music kind of sparked so much of this female power. And I don't know if you remember, it was you, Melissa Etheridge, No Doubt, Sarah McLachlan, Sean Colvin, Sheryl Crow, Tracy Chapman. I don't know if you remember that. I think that might have been the first time. That was December of '96 when you played the Garden. I don't know if you remember that.
This would have been before that for sure.
Wow. Okay.
I wasn't famous yet. When I toured with Bob and Neil, I don't know. Thank God they took me under their wing, because that record was like I said, the first record failed, and I was making a second record when I went out with Neil. So we'd given up on Whole Save Your Soul. We'd given up on You're Meant for Me. We tried for over a year on both those songs to be laughed out of radio. Like, I can't even tell you, like, oh my God, I was opening for goth bands and opening for the Ramones and opening for Bauhaus and Peter Murphy. And, shock jocks was the thing. Everybody was trying to imitate Howard. So I'd get on a radio station and be like, how do you give a blowjob with those teeth? And you're like,
oh my gosh.
Right.
I did remember, a radio show down the South, and they're like, you may have heard me describe my next guest as a large-breasted woman from Alaska. Jewel, how are you? And I was like, you must be that small penis man I've heard so much about from South Carolina. And I was kicked out of this. I was kicked out of so many radio stations before I ever got to you guys. My label was like, please, just keep your trap shut. And I was like, I can't. I was not taught to take it or eat it in my life. Like, that's not how I roll.
Well, you were working against yourself, because back then you had to have radio.
You did.
I mean, you had to get that pop star thing or whatever star.
Yeah, you did. And, so I just kept giving it back to the guys that, would give it to me, and I kept getting kicked out of stations. So funny. Yeah, the record, luckily, when I was touring with Neil, things started to pop during that tour. It was kind of this tide shift. And then Neil, I think Conan put me on TV, and that was like a thing. And then John Sykes put me on VH1. And that started to change the tides, with Who'll Save Your Soul. I went back to that first record, and we just punched it through. But I think it took a year and a half, maybe 2 years on that record.
So what was the moment when you walked outside and you thought, oh, wow, people know who I am? Like, not what triggered it, but do you remember the moment? Like, were you walking out of a specific hotel, or were you walking out of, and you're like, holy shit, this is real?
When I got on the cover of Time, you know, it was years after that record came out, but it was still on that record. And having just eaten shit for so many, you know, years, being told you can't do it, you're singing about being sensitive, you talk about angels, you know, like the press really, really disliked me. I was so earnest at the height of when cynical was cool. And that the headline, I can't remember what it said, but it was something like macho is out and empathy is in. And it was my face on Time magazine. And it was just like, it was one of those moments where you're like, suck it, world. Like, I did it, you know, like, and I stayed sensitive and I did it my way. And to see that tide shift, and now that females, you know, not that I was the only one that helped that tide shift, but that tide shift was like, whoo, we fought for that.
How was it working with all of those females during Lilith Fair? Because it was a moment in time, and I wish it would just, something like that would come back, because women are still not getting their due at terrestrial radio, unfortunately, especially in the country space.
Do it, Leslie.
We do. We need another modern day Lilith Fair. And I remember seeing you a couple of different Lilith Fair shows.
Yeah, you know, it was, you know, hard for all of us in the 90s. You know, radio doesn't want to play more than two. You won't play women back to back in an hour block. For you to fight your way as a woman into that top 10 is really hard, because they'll only let a couple women usually in that top 10. And I don't know that it's changed a ton. You still won't hear a ton of women back to back, whereas you'll always hear men back to back. But I think a lot of that has to do, you know, with what we expect of ourselves as women. You know, I never felt held back because I was a woman. It was something I had to solve for, maybe. But I think that talent fixes a lot of shit. And you have to focus on being talented and never... I'd rather not be famous, right? I'd rather be a musician. And so you keep your focus on the quality of your work, and you do what you're comfortable with. And I do think a lot of women, more than men, although it happens with men so much, a lot of people want to be liked, and you want to be cute, and you want to be accepted more than you want to ferociously be yourself. And, you know, country historically has some of the boldest, baddest women in all of music. I mean, you look at Loretta Lynn, and you look, I mean, Loretta Lynn, let's just like, I have an altar in my house to Loretta Lynn. She wrote, you know, the Pill. I know that isn't the title of the song, but I'm not thinking of it. It's a radical punk rock song. You know, punk rock is the unapologetic desire to be yourself. And that was Loretta. And that was a lot of women in country in that era. There were just some badass women. And in pop too, you know, in singer-songwriters, there were some badass women in the 60s that were ferociously themselves. As soon as you start trying to be liked more than you try and be yourself, you're going to be deeply compromised. And for some reason, I see that more with women in music a little bit. I saw so many posers in the 90s of guys, don't get me wrong. But I think women tend to get lauded for their looks, and they want to be popular. And so they maybe make music that isn't as artistic. But, you know, that's why I loved seeing Miranda Lambert come on the scene in country, is she was just herself. You know, and the Dixie Chicks were themselves. We need more women who want to be themselves more than they want to be popular. Because if you're going to let a label put songs on you, it's just never going to be that interesting. And you might even be popular, but it's not that interesting. And so you're not going to break through. And I think country actually demands their women, especially, to be themselves. A lot of guys are getting on the radio in country that aren't, I don't know, it's not that interesting. It's not like that singer-songwriter country thing like Merle and, you know, those greats. But they're getting by with it a lot, with a lot less onus. The women seem to have a much higher standard, which is kind of good, you know. And so if any women are watching, like, write your songs, write about what makes you angry and what makes you happy, and trust that there will be people to support that perspective if it's good.
I want to go back to one more question about when you got started. I was looking at the Atlantic Records roster in 1995. was their roster kind of a decision factor for you on if you'd sign with Atlantic? Because they had like all these hits. They had Hootie and the Blowfish, Collective Soul, Edwin McCain, Jamie Walters, Everything But the Girl. Did their roster affect your decision making?
Look at the 93 roster. I was signed in 93, believe it or not.
Oh, you were signed in 93, right? 95, you exploded. 90. Okay, let me look at 93
or 96. But anyway, no, I don't think I looked at the roster. I just was dealing with people. You know, like I'd met Tommy Mottola, and he and I weren't necessarily a fit. Danny Goldberg was at Atlantic, and he had signed Nirvana and, you know, like Bonnie Raitt. And you kind of had huevos as far as signing real artists went, it seemed. And they're the ones that gave me the deal with the back end that I was looking for. And when I looked them in the eye, even though Danny, you know, became one of those classic, you know, CEOs that went label to label, golden parachuting around. He wasn't there long, but, you know, when I looked him in the eyes and was like, I'm an artist. Am I going to be okay? You know, he said, yeah. And I found my champions in Atlantic, and, you know, working a label system is its own art. You know, it could be its own show of what artists need to do at labels to keep, you know, people engaged in you and caring, because there's 600 artists and there's people vying for the same marketing budget.
What's it like living in Alaska, Jewel?
You know, the way I was raised was beautiful. My family are homesteaders. They pioneered the state in the early 40s. We, you know, only had creek water. We didn't have running water. We only ate what we could kill or can. We had an outhouse. And when I came on the scene, you know, on the pop side, nobody could understand it. They even would just sort of make fun of it. And I don't know why. I do find like each East and West Coast press tends to make fun of like rural lifestyles, which is bizarre to me. But once my family's show came out, Alaska, The Last Frontier, it's been out for maybe 11 or 12 years now. It was like people could really see how I was raised and where I was raised, and the beauty in that lifestyle that isn't ranching it isn't ranching. It's, you know, homesteading's different. And I remember when I went into the country genre, again, it was starting over, and I was in Florida. I won't say where or what station, but a lot of the stations wouldn't even let me in. Like they made me sit in the lobby, and they wouldn't let me even come in to talk. Or they would just even kind of try to humiliate me and be like, you can sing in the lobby, you know, and you're like, and I don't know why I get off on that. I guess you have to keep switching genres, but I'd be like, no problem. You know what I mean? But I remember sitting in this program director's office in a country station, and I knew him from the pop world, by the way. So, but going from pop into country is really, it's controversial. And as it, you know, country's been country for a long time, forever, and it's been good. And it's been made fun of so much, and it becomes fashionable and unfashionable to be country. So I actually really deeply understand the cynicism of when somebody wants to come into country. Like I totally get that. And that's why I didn't mind at all. But I remember this guy who came from pop. So apparently it's okay for program directors to come over, just not the artists. and I'm vocal about what I think clearly. But I remember sitting in his office, and he had his arms crossed. He goes, so what makes you country? And I'm thinking in my head, like, I know you from the pop world, so I don't even know how to start on this. But B, I grew up eating squirrel stew. Like, what did you grow up with? Like, what makes you country? Like, I know what I am. Like, I don't need like a PD to tell me if I'm country or not. So it was just, yeah, funny.
Being from Alaska, are you a complete salmon snob? Like, do you have to be like at the best? You must like just get the best salmon, you know? Like you grew up around, and then you come to the States where you have these like little cubes of
nothing
squished ugliness.
You probably catch your own
salmon.
Yeah, I grew up, we'd set out a subsistence net and catch 75 king salmon in a tide, you know. But those days are gone. We've overfished all of our oceans. And what we do to our food is so gross. You know, I like meat. I'm a carnivore, but, you know, when you raise your cattle or you eat game, it's very healthy. And it's hard. You understand the value of taking a life and how hard it is. It's nothing you do lightly. We're so disconnected from our food. Oh.
What does squirrel stew taste like?
I don't like squirrel. Squirrel's gross. It's your last
cute.
Resort when the freezer's empty. Ugh. I really don't like it. It's gristly and really gross.
Jewel, you said this a couple of times in the interview today, but you came out to an event for me at CMT in 2014 with our Next Women of Country event. And it is tough for women in country music, but you gave one of the most empowering, inspiring, moving speeches to that audience. And I remember after getting calls from all of these managers of female artists going, I have to have a copy of this speech that Jewel gave. It's so important because you did talk about make a decision. Are you an artist or do you want to be a celebrity? And you've been able to distinguish between the two. And I do feel for a lot of artists today because of social media.
Yeah, but social media, again, is just how you use it. And the most important thing is we make 5 million decisions every day, all of us in our careers. Anybody that's hustling is making a lot of decisions every day. And you kind of have to know what you're making a decision for. And if you don't ask yourself first what you want, as an artist especially, it's very important. You're going to be making very willy-nilly decisions. And sometimes it's going to be great for art, and sometimes it can be great for fame, and sometimes it's great for both. But you have to have that North Star. I make decisions because. And then it makes it really clear when you're given an opportunity. A really good example was I was making my first record. So this is 94, maybe 93 even. And The Real World was it had its first season. It was the very first reality show. I didn't know what it was. It wasn't very popular yet. But my label came to me. They were starting their second season, and they said there's this new thing where we put cameras in houses and we watch people, and you will get famous. We will record the record live on camera. You'll be watched on national television going from homeless to making your record. And it's pretty much a guaranteed home run. You'll be famous. And I turned it down because it didn't fit my goal of being an artist. And being from agriculture, hardwood grows slowly. There's no shortcut in nature. So if nature doesn't have a shortcut, I better not try one because it isn't sustainable. Otherwise, nature would have figured out how to make shortcuts. Hardwood grows slowly, and I wanted the long term. I'm still that way. I want a 60-year career. I want to be remembered as one of the best singer-songwriters of all time. That's not something you're given overnight. You've got to keep doing good work. It's hard. It's a hard goal. And you got to put the time in, and there's just no shortcut. So I turned it down. And I remember my label being like... That was Real World
specifically? That was Real World, not something like it, but that was the actual Real World?
No, that was the actual TV show. Wow. And that season blew up, by the way. That was their San Francisco season.
Oh, San Francisco with Puck.
I guess. I mean, again, I didn't watch it. I just know that I turned it down.
Well, that was a smart move.
Yes.
I guess so. But there were years. There were years where those people were famous, and I was... about to get dropped by my label. So just those little critical decisions. Don't take the money. Stay away from the reality show. But you have to be willing for it not to work. You have to be willing to be like, all right, I'm a singer-songwriter. Nobody knows me. You have to live with that. I've never heard
that story before. Have you told that story before?
No, I haven't.
I can't believe that you were pitched to be on The Real World. That would have been the biggest disaster choice. Because when you look back, they're famous for minutes, not years. I mean, it really is fast.
Yeah, but again, that's hindsight's great. Hindsight makes you look brilliant. At the dawn of a new genre, when it's like, holy shit, and it was a huge opportunity. And it would have worked, but I would have been famous for the wrong reason and not for the right reason. And so it's those types of things that the whole industry was telling me, you gotta do this. This is a freaking no-brainer. Everybody was saying it. And I'm like, it doesn't feel right. It's hard to be an artist. You have to say, these are my values. I live my life according to these values, and I don't compromise. And when I do, I notice it and go, ooh, that didn't feel good. And I redirect myself. Artists have to do that. And managers have to, if I was a manager, I'd be sitting down going, tell me your core values, and we're going to make decisions based on that. And that's going to be your map. This is how you navigate the forest of a really difficult business. And life, frankly, for everybody. I do it with my son.
Jewel, when's some new music? We need some.
Yeah, I'm making a record right now. I've thought it was so strange that with all the political upheaval in the last 10 years, I thought punk rock would be coming back, folk music would be coming back,
True.
And it doesn't seem to be happening. And it actually is what made me decide to make a mainstream record again. I've been making indie records on the side because I'm a mom. And so I decided to take a swing at it. This record has more of a soul feel. Again, I seem to be switching genres a little bit, pushing myself vocally. There's a song called No More Tears you could look up, and you'll kind of see where my singing's at and where my writing's at.
And congratulations on the 25th anniversary of Pieces of You. What a trip down memory lane of such a seminal record. And, you know, even at the time you were getting compared to like Joni Mitchell. So that record is just one of the best, again, I said it earlier, of our generation.
Well, thanks. It's a trip to see that little record was able to do what it did. And
unbelievable. On
my website, I did a show where I sang the album top to bottom. I've never done it. And so it was really fun. And on my website, you can still go see that show.
That's over what? It's over 10 million in the U.S., right? I mean,
I think it was 12 in the U.S. and maybe 15 or 16 worldwide.
And Jules, something else you're doing. Would that be one of your necklaces you're wearing around your neck?
Why, thank you for asking. Yes.
Oh, yes.
I love jewelry, and I do mindfulness. A lot of the exercises I invented when I was homeless were actually proven to rewire your brain by a neuroscientist named Dr. Brewer. And they're up on a free website. It's a charitable website. If anybody just wants to learn about anxiety and how to solve for it, it's jewelneverbroken.com. But I started making jewelry as like rosary beads to remind myself to stay grounded in whatever I was working on. So I developed an entire line based on different principles and values. It's at songlinesbyjewel.com.
That's incredible. So it's like best-selling author Jewel.
And designer, Leslie.
And designer.
What guest has been this coordinated? Look at that background. Look at the whole thing.
Unbelievable.
Like, she came to play.
I'm not huge scale. It's literally me and my best friend and two other women. Like it's four of us that make all this by hand. So I didn't do like a big licensing deal again, like most celebrities would do. Like we just make it by ourselves here, and it's a tiny company, but it has a lot of heart, and I love doing it.
What's the company called?
It's called Songlines by Jewel.
And when you have new music out, we would love to have you come back on and talk to us.
Yeah, I'd love it. I'd love to sing for you guys. You know, like I said, my goal of I want to be one of the best singers, and I want to be one of the best singer-songwriters. And I wrote 200 songs for this new album to get 10 I liked. It was so hard as a middle-aged artist to get out of your head and not think about radio and not think about who you've been and find something authentic. I see why middle-aged artists do lots of drugs.
Your career has been just beyond impressive, and you keep doing new things and keep changing up, but it always works. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable.
She's
funny
a real
looking
artist.
Back, like when I did that pop record, I don't know if you guys remember, but it pissed people off so bad because coming out of the 90s.
I asked you about that, about intuition. I talked to you about a month ago, and we talked about intuition, and I had no idea that the label was actually kind of mad about that song.
The label wasn't actually, and I've always turned in records sight unseen. Like they've always just let me go in the studio and hand in records. And I let them know, I was like, I'm going to do a pop record. Like I'm going to write a full on pop record. And they're like, all right, let's do it. I mean, they were just used to me, but it was the press that really was like, you can't be a singer-songwriter. You're sellout now. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I think being a sellout is doing You Were Meant for Me 0.3, 0.4, because that's what I'm expected to do. So it was a very fascinating thing. I know what you're thinking about. I think you're thinking about when like Geffen sat me down. He wasn't my label. So I was asked to like come into the meet. I think it was Geffen. I kind of get some of those big guys confused, but I went into his office. I thought maybe he wanted me to write for somebody else because I'm not his artist. I'm not on his label. And so I came in and he sits me down and I can tell I'm in trouble. Like I felt like I got called into the principal's office and like I'm a little kid. I'm like, the vibe's very weird in here. I sit down. He pulls up a chair pretty close right across from me. He goes, he doesn't say hi. He doesn't say shit. He goes, nobody wants this generation's Joni Mitchell to wear a miniskirt. You knock it the fuck off. I was like,
wow.
That's right. That's
strong
right.
feelings. Like, whoa.
Wow.
Dang, there's a nice quote.
Yeah, it was a trip. That record was a trip. But I love it. I love that record. And I love the songs I wrote on that thing. So it's been fun. You
did look great in that video. You look great in that video, by the way.
Right on. Yeah, it's been fun. And, any artist listening or watching, like the only person that'll put you in a box is yourself. Like just give yourself permission to do what you want and put your whole heart into it. And it may not work out right away, but over the course of life, it should always work out. And you won't always make everybody happy, so you might as well make yourself happy.
Congratulations on all your success, and we really appreciate you coming on the Pop Culture Show.
Yeah, really fun. It's so nice to see all of you. Really, really
You're
glad
so
to see all of
inspiring,
you.
Jewel. Thank you so much.
You really are.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you, Jewel.
appreciate it. It's nice to see all
You
of
should
your
be a motivational
faces.
speaker.
She is a motivational speaker. She is. So
Yeah, you really are. I mean,
Well,
seriously.
right on. Thanks,
have a
guys.
wonderful holiday. Thank you.
All right. I'll see y'all.